iron is a big one because that is, like I mentioned earlier, that's been part of the fortification program in a lot of developed nations since the 30s or 40s, and so we live in in a world that is very iron laden, and we have soils that are very copper deficient, even though people have been trained to believe that they're copper toxic. So that's the conundrum there, right? And copper, because of all that sort of dogma and training around that to believe that it's toxic, the beneficial role of it in terms of the mitochondria. So it turns out that it's very, very crucial for your cells to be able to produce ATP. So you have a series of sort of steps in that conversion. One of the last steps they call complex 4, and it's fully copper dependent, but it's bioavailable copper dependent. So if you were someone like myself and countless other people out there that have drowned their body in zinc, iron, and these sorts of things, and they've gotten in a state where all their iron is stuck in their tissue, right, which just creates that reactive oxygen species, ROS, or oxidative stress for short, and copper deficiency, then you can't make energy. Or you make it very poorly. You make this dysfunctional ATP, and that's where your metabolic health starts to be essentially dysfunctional and wrecked from there. And then it's hopefully a case of stumbling upon this and understanding that sort of. I should say too, there's other reasons why you can end up with broken mitochondria, right? Infections, stress, toxins, all that sort of stuff too. But this is an area which is really overlooked and that a lot of people can find themselves into because they've stayed on iron supplements or they're eating a diet that's really deficient in retinol, right? And you need retinol to build that copper carrying protein. And
can you explain what retinol is again?
Yeah, so retinol is vitamin A from animal-based sources. It's not beta carotene, right? So a lot of that vegan sort of community will say we get our vitamin A, and it's like no, you get beta carotene, and your body has to then try and convert that over to retinol, and it does that at the expense of things like zinc, right, which you're already not getting enough of on a plant-based diet. That's another sort of pocket. But an ancestral diet, ancestors had loads of retinol. They were using raw dairy. They were using the whole animal nose to tail. They were not deficient in retinol. Their soils were a lot higher too in trace minerals like magnesium. And it turns out magnesium, that is a really, really crucial part too. And we've all heard that over the years. I don't think there's any camp that will argue about the benefits of magnesium, right?
And
I actually get people. What's that?
I was going to say maybe the form of magnesium is where.
Yeah. So again, a lot of nuance in the form. I get a lot of people these days making their own magnesium, which admittedly I did find out about through Matt Blackburn's work at some point. And that's magnesium bicarbonate. And essentially you use a soda stream machine to convert, a certain type of magnesium that you can buy really cheap, it turns out, and make your own. And that's really bioavailable. And so, getting back to that sort of picture of depleted soils, really magnesium, iodine, and boron deplete. So people can find themselves in this sort of web of chronic fatigue. Meanwhile, a lot of practitioners aren't looking in those areas. They might look at the stealth infections or pay too much attention to other areas, right? The microbiome, for example. All of those are good areas to look in. But I'm really, now that I'm sort of aware of this stuff, like I say, in the last year or two especially, I've really sort of found how many patients actually have just this metabolic dysfunction, at the root of everything. And Morley's a big advocate who will say when that's happening, when you've got rusty tissue, copper deficiencies, magnesium deficiencies, that's when the parasites wake up, as he says. That's when the viruses wake up. You're creating an environment for them to thrive, right? And then suddenly you get pockets of people who are just attacking the pathogens, right? And that's okay. You can do that short term to lower the pathogen load. But if that underlying metabolic imbalance isn't dealt with, they'll just come back. And I've seen that heaps. And I remember learning that and just feeling like really settled with that, just going, okay, cool. I like that. So if we can replete these, this imbalance and replete these minerals which have just been lost and not talked about, that makes sense that we're changing the terrain. And this is what gets into terrain theory. There's a lot of people in this sort of metabolic space that talk about terrain theory. Some, I think, probably go a little bit too far with it, if I can say that. But that's another story. But it comes back to the terrain.
I mean, that coming back to the terrain, someone asked me to do a podcast on this, and I thought it's perhaps just a better one to quickly touch base on, because I don't have much to say about it other than this. I was talking to someone in the community, and I was saying how it's ironic how when I used to get onto a plane, I used to put my shirt up or my scarf up, because I was like, I joked to myself, I don't want to breathe in what these virus, like laden, parasite having people.
These normies.
Yeah, and I'd get into my space and I'd spray my things around me and I'd wipe around me and I wouldn't want to touch things in the airport, so on and so forth. And they said, "Oh, that really surprises me. I thought you were someone who would subscribe to terrain theory and not germ theory." And I was like, "Oh, don't you know that both of them exist?" And this is someone who's just kind of like COVID had sparked them into realizing that they have a sovereign terrain-based capacity. Yes. And I guess terrain theory is something that I was exposed to through Robert Cassar, who we were talking about earlier as well, maybe excessively leaning in one direction. But I was like, well, no, let's go back into classical Chinese medicine. That is all about going, if your yin yang wu xing, if your transformation cycle, so if your qi is transforming with flow through each of the organ systems, through yang yin, yin yang, in different degrees and expressions, then let's say you have a terrain which can protect itself. But that doesn't mean you be disrespectful to the system and be aware that it's not, as much as it is infinite, it also is finite in what it can do, because it's yin and yang. And therefore you still put a scarf on when the wind is coming in cold to stop the wind invading in through your throat. You still make sure that your kidneys are nice and warm so the cold doesn't invade them, or through your, through your feet. So it's yes to both. And so I'll just put it, because someone wanted me to, talk about it. And so now that's my piece.
Yeah, I back that up big time too. And it's something that I've not wanted to get into, because there's just so much emotion behind that at the moment between terrain and germ theory. It's intense.